PRX has always been a huge fan favorite for their uniquely aggressive playstyle.
Their playstyle is so fast, it is impossible for me to get bored.
Their playstyle is not only fun to watch and play against, according to Tens, but they're also consistently competitive on the international stage, giving fans another good reason to cheer for them. However, their overall competitiveness has started to change in recent years. Last year, Gen.G rose to become the best team in the Pacific region, while PRX looked as if they were slowly falling further and further behind everyone else. This trend continued into this year, and after a crushing defeat to DFM in the lower bracket of kickoff, this will be the very first time in VCT history, going all the way back to 2022, that this PRX core has failed to make an international event. So what is really happening to W Gaming that's causing them not only to lose, but barely win a single round against DFM on Pearl? In this video, we're going to uncover the full truth behind PRX's problems by looking thoroughly at their gameplay over all these years. We're going to understand what made PRX good to begin with, how competitive Valorant has evolved over the last couple years, and finally, analyze all the pitfalls and weaknesses that have led PRX to the state they're in now. What do they really need to fundamentally change to be able to catch up with modern day Valorant and once again compete on the world stage for a championship? Back in the day, PRX were one of the very first teams to show us the full extent of how Valorant could be played. Their aggressive playstyle surprised a lot of teams at the time, especially those who were still following a playstyle which was fundamentally closer to Counter-Strike ideology. Even though old competitive Valorant was still much faster paced than it is today, nobody knew the full extent of how fast teams could really run it down. And PRX showed us exactly that on both attack and defense. PRX perfected this style enough to consistently get them deep into tournaments, but they would always eventually hit a wall when they met a team who knew how to play a slower style and avoid their crazy aggression. In all of their major tournament losses, we can see huge rounds that PRX's playstyle is explicitly countered by these more methodical teams, and those games were always their most crushing defeats. They struggled with FPX in 2022, who had this type of methodical style, but also with EG during the 2023 Champs Final, who knew how to play this way as well. Since then, teams have only become even better at this style, and G2 completely picked PRX apart during their Champs 2024 matchup with strategies that forced PRX into those late round scenarios that they just aren't comfortable in. It's pretty obvious by now that slower playstyles can be PRX's weakness, but the Valorant meta has naturally moved towards slower and slower rounds every single year. You can see that the average round time has been steadily increasing since 2022. Out of all teams in the world, PRX are the most affected by this meta shift towards slower rounds, because PRX's rounds are some of the fastest rounds in the world on both attack and defense. This plot compares each team's average round time during Champs in 2023. The average attack round length is on the x-axis and the average defense round length is on the y-axis. You can see that during this event, PRX were one of the fastest teams in the world, taking an average of 79.1 seconds on attack and 82.3 seconds on defense. Evil Geniuses, who eventually beat PRX in the grand final, had a much more balanced position on this graph, which indicates that they had a better balance of styles that they could play. When we look at Champs in 2024, the meta had slowed down even more by then, but the craziest part of all this is that PRX started playing even faster than they did before. PRX had the fastest attack by far at 78.1 seconds, and the fastest defense at 78.7 seconds on average. This put them way faster than any other team at the event, and you can see that the meta is clearly getting slower as all other teams moved away from the bottom left of the graph, except for PRX, who were actively moving in the opposite direction. A super interesting thing to point out from these graphs is that EDG had the fastest defense in 2023 by far when they tied for 5th at the event. However, in 2024, EDG learned to slow that down significantly by more than 8 seconds, learning to play more retake scenarios and learning how to win through map control, rather than just forcing fights all the time. Just like when EG won in 2023, EDG won in 2024 with one of the most balanced average round times out of all teams at the tournament. A moderate round time indicates that you have better fundamentals on both sides of the equation, which seems to be common amongst the teams that end up winning it all. At this point, it's obvious that PRX needs to adjust their style to be able to play slower, but just spending more time on attack or defense is meaningless unless you're actually using that time effectively. So let's try and really understand PRX's gameplay patterns and break down the problems and how they view macro as a whole. We can start by looking at how they've historically run their attack sides, which is well known to be the side that they're more comfortable with. Attack allows you to dictate the pace of the game, which is perfect for their fast-paced playstyle, and they were one of the first teams in VCT that consistently picked to start the attacking side on many maps. PRX have one main approach to playing attack, and this approach is centered around conditioning their opponents to be scared of their explosive sight hits and unbeatable team fighting. Over the years, people have called this the PRX death ball, and it's exactly that because it's so frustrating to fight against. They're incredibly hard to break when they're pushing as a group, and this is the case no matter what sort of map position they're in. Against EG on Ascent in 2023, they started with all 5 players pushing B main for multiple rounds in a row. EG tried a lot of different things, like taking complete control of the opposite side of the map, running up the flank quickly, and fast rotations into sites. Even though EG definitely had certain macro advantages in these rounds, when PRX are grouped together and playing aggressively, strategy doesn't seem to help you in those cases, and it's incredibly hard not to get caught defending sites. This is so frustrating as the defending team because you feel like you're tactically set up to succeed but just can't seem to stop them. And then, when you're sitting there contemplating about what to do and how to win that fight in B main, PRX suddenly blast themselves through A and win another round. Their attack sides work solely off making their enemies fearful of their big team fights and hard executes, and after they've instilled that fear, they can really begin to chain rounds together quickly. You'd think that this style is super punishable because PRX lack a lot of map control by playing this way. But there's a reason that PRX don't care about map control at all, because their team pushes just break a lot of conventional setups and can make standard map theory obsolete. It's honestly ridiculous how often we see PRX get away with hitting stacked sites just by being so good at fighting together. And this wasn't only when teams were worse, this is still a regular occurrence for them in 2025, even against top teams in the region like T1, and especially on maps like Fracture, which are exec heavy and very reliant on your team winning big fights. Now that there's pressure to lose to PRX's death ball, teams tend to get sucked into this mentality of continuously fighting back and often end up playing on PRX's terms. We'll see defenders start to over-rotate and stack sites off of any type of noise, and this allows PRX to force themselves back through the weak side if they feel like a site is overstacked, even without any control of the opposite side. It's common sense when you see positions like this, where all 5 players are stuck in the same spot, to think you're pretty screwed. But PRX have no issue with 5-man rotating to the other side of the map to deathball their way through anyway. PRX rounds defy conventional Valorant tactics, and they've learned how to explicitly weaponize the fact that they play a wildly different pace and a wildly different style than everyone else. At this point, PRX understands that every team they play against is already looking out for their fast playstyle, so they have learned to throw in a lot of variations at the start of rounds to try and confuse opponents. But this pressure is rarely used as anything except for a fake. The main goal is always to move back into a full site exec shortly afterwards. In this pistol against 100 Thieves on Sunset, you can see that PRX begin with mid control, which results in an opening skirmish. They end up losing a player, but win mid control in response. But they're not playing for a lurker or looking for openings through mid at all. Everyone on PRX just groups up together towards a main. Again, we can see that 100 Thieves has some sort of read on this, but like we've seen before, when PRX is given enough space to take these fights as a team, it's hard to stop even if you have a good idea it's happening. Nowadays, it's more standard practice for PRX to run these openings involving fake pressure because their reputation alone is enough for teams to watch for those fast and hard execs, so they need to do a little bit more to keep their hits unexpected, even though they end up grouping as 5 99% of the time anyway. Going back to their game against EG on Ascent, we can see them start round 5 with some A main control. As we know, this is just used as fake pressure to keep EG guessing, because shortly after, the entire team rotates through spawn back to B. Now we're just seeing another hard exec through B main with Harbor Ult, but what happens when you reject to fight the death ball altogether? EG couldn't beat the death ball, so another solution is for them to adjust their setup and try playing retake. Now we see PRX expend all their good utility on a site that is completely clear, while EG take out the lurker who's expecting the market player to be focused on the execute. They can set up the 5v4 retake with Omen ult into B main, and you can see that PRX have pretty weak positions and low utility to play out their post plant and finally lose their first round of the game. EG earned a bunch of rounds back this half by playing for retake, and showed that certain retake tactics can be a big counter to PRX's playstyle for multiple reasons. An obvious one is the way that PRX use their utility, which is closely related to the comps that they're playing. It's been said 1,000 times that PRX needs to play better comps, but let me show you concrete examples of where this can make a massive difference and how the agent meta has also been evolving against PRX in the last few years.